Hi, this is Veterans Defense Investments presentation number 2 of The World is So Fracked 2022 and how you profit from coming more. Okay, in the last one, I kind of talked about this geopolitical situation we are finding ourselves in as nations, as groups, as organizations, as individuals. So I wiped that stuff out from the outline, and I'm going to talk about war calculus and how to profit in this one. So, just to review from last time, we have Axis 2 lining up in potential conflict with Allies 2, and these are only a shortened list of the combatants you will see. There will be some surprising ones like Myanmar. Myanmar is on the front line with China, so it's very likely to be a proxy war destination for what's going on. Okay, so as I said last time, the two most abundant things we have worldwide now are Clausewitzian escalations, which are basically when one nation makes threatening gestures towards another before war, and after war starts, attacks. And debt. We have so much debt. The world is in so much debt to itself that the pile is so massive, it's going to cause wars to happen because that's the only way to get out of debt. And I'll show you. I'll explain that later. So there are two paths to war. Okay, so as a military officer, you learn how to do tactical planning. You learn how to do strategic planning at certain levels, but you also know how to take on the role of a combatant and act in their shoes. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we get to war from a gameplay, step by step prediction of what's going to happen, because the players have no choice but to act in the ways that they act because they're in the situations they put themselves in. And the two ways to do it are COVID lawsuits against the USA and or China, but I'll use China in this one, which will lead in the debt fiasco. And the other one is a trade war or investor losses, which is kind of the same thing. The outcome scenario in both cases, because everyone owes so much money to the world, are debt fiascos. And a debt fiasco, a sovereign debt crisis, is an impetus to go to war. Remember, in the Weimar Republic, German marks hyperinflated so badly money was useless. And what happened then? They got Hitler armed for war, and he took over Europe. Okay, so in military parlance, you do Kriegsspielen, you do war games to explain. You take some of your officers and make them act like your enemies, and then you go through the process of deciding what happens next. Okay, so this is an example how I can demonstrate to you war is going to happen. It's not a possibility, it is a probability at this point. Okay, let's start from this. Let's assume that world governments realized China was the culprit in letting loose the Wuhan flu from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Put yourself in the world's shoes, let's say. The world will demand reparations from China. They will take them to court in the World Trade Organization, or they will simply launch a letter, whether it's through the World Trade Organization or the United States and all its creditors, saying, China, we have found you guilty of being culpable for letting loose the pandemic, which cost us trillions of dollars. Now pretend you're China. Is China going to pay that? Never. They will politely tell you to pound sand, and off you go. So what will happen then? Well, the next move will be the world, and it could be just Western nations, it could just be NATO, blocks China trade in retaliation. We're not going to buy your shit. We're going to tariff it 300%, whatever. We're going to get our money back from you one way or another. So what happens then if you're China? What happens to China if your world trade is cut off and you owe so much money you have to keep borrowing and selling just to keep the lights on, just to keep people employed before your society implodes? You can't get any more investor money. They've cut off your investor funding from New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street. What do you do now? Well, I'm going to tell you, there is one play available to them, and it's invade Taiwan. And I'll explain why later. But they invade Taiwan because Taiwan is basically under the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp. It is the swing supplier of semiconductors, chips, CPUs, graphic processor units for all those cell phones, all those laptops, all those workstations, all those servers. If China invades and holds Taiwan, it can basically hold the price of semiconductors just like OPEC controls the price of oil. So what happens then? If China invades Taiwan, and let's say nobody came to Taiwan's aid, and then suddenly China now has control of $500 billion of CPU, GPU, semiconductor production a year, the entire world falls apart. So in order to stop that, what does the world do? It attacks Taiwan. It goes just like George Bush the First attacked Kuwait to take it back from Saddam Hussein, right? It was an injustice. Saddam was distracting from his own bad record, his own failures. He takes over Kuwait. He's seen as a hero locally. So what does the American force allies do? They invade Kuwait and take it back and give it back to the Kuwaitis. That's exactly what would happen if the world demanded reparations from China. The last move in the game would be the world would be forced to attack Taiwan and take it back. It's going to happen. Game scenario 2. Let's say the USA, just the USA itself, demands reparations from China for the Wuhan flu bioweapon. Same play happens. It doesn't matter. China refuses. Then the USA blocks China's trade. Well, the USA's largest trading partner is Canada, but the second one is China. Again, that becomes a huge problem for the Chinese government. They can't keep everyone employed, and they need to keep their middle class employed so nobody's striking, nobody's going on protests. And because they're a dictatorship, they have to keep control of their people. So they have to have the money flowing in. So what does China do? Its only play is to invade Taiwan. If it does, it's still going to hold the world hostage for semiconductors. It's going to jack up GPU, CPU prices, and everyone's going to suffer for that. The whole world economy will grind to a halt. So what happens? The world, not just the USA, attacks China. It could be Germany. It could be the United Kingdom. It could be France. It could be all of the above. It could be all of the above, and Myanmar will attack China. There's another way that China goes down this path to war. China, the state, is a co-partner with all the companies inside China. That's the way the communist dictatorship maintains control. Investors who've just lost billions, if not trillions of dollars of invested money, we're talking your pension funds, we're talking your BlackRock and all the Bridgewater Associates and all these hedge funds. They have assets in China that are basically worthless now. They are so indebted because the Chinese Communist Party steals from everybody. Xi Jinping is a billionaire. He doesn't make that fact well known, but if somebody says communism is great, all you have to say to them is Xi Jinping is a billionaire. He's the emperor of China now, and he's a billionaire. So how exactly is the communist worker revolt helping the average Chinese worker? All right. But the same thing happens. If investors of the world demand their money back from China, like the Evergrande real estate fiasco, they have so much debt, it's impossible for them to pay it back. It ends in the gameplay ends in the same spot. China holds the world hostage over semiconductors. It's the only way they can get a financial advantage over everyone else. Just like they have rare earth metals, they will use Taiwan as a club against the West, against the world. So why Taiwan? I've mentioned it a couple times. TSMC is one of the largest semiconductor manufacturing companies on earth. It got there by undercutting Western semiconductor makers and forcing a lot of them to go bankrupt or to be sold off as damaged goods for other companies. So they are now the swing player in this global supply of semiconductors. And they run an annual business of $500 billion. Now, can you imagine if you were a regime that needs to pay off $300 trillion? Because I'm guessing that if you put the real estate Ponzi scheme they have in China, which is probably about $75 trillion, added together with their global local bonds of 8, you're now up to about 90. Okay, the Chinese government, all those communists, have borrowed money from shadow banks and stealth loans and all the rest of that stuff. They owe so much money, and it's on nothing. They have no assets underneath. That's why the Chinese companies do not honestly open their books for a New York Stock Exchange review. Because they know what has gone on for the last 30 years is workers working their tails off in China to turn a profit. The Chinese environment being turned to shit, air full of smog, water full of toxins, so that communist officials can make themselves rich. And once that can of worms is opened up, it spills all over everything. War is always about money. Okay, so let's explain this from a war calculus perspective. Let's start with War Economics 101. You can make the loser pay your war reparations and or cancel your debt. If you win, they sign a peace deal on your terms, so you must force them to lose. In order to force somebody to lose, you are going to borrow extreme amounts of money to win. This is completely not what human beings are made for and understand, but this is the reality of how war works. In another video, I show you the U.S. Defense spending in the World War II era. It is off the charts over everything else the U.S. government spent on. It was a massive impulse of money, of buying. Anything and everything, crazy projects, the Special Services Force. They threw everything at the Nazis and then everything at Japan. They spared no expense. So trust me, the debt is so bad they need somebody to take it off their hands. So they will counterintuitively borrow 10 times the amount of money to make sure the other guy loses. And of course, war is the great unifier of a nation. So it's going to distract the citizenry who should be stopping them. Hey, you owe us $30 trillion. Why are you spending another $100 trillion to beat China? All right. So if the war's going on, there's scenes from the front, people dying. Everyone gets distracted about the blunders, the economy, and the hardship that they're facing because their fellow countrymen are dying in some foolish adventure off the shores of Taiwan. Okay, war dynamics. So here's the reality. Remember I said all these countries are in debt, and they're in debt up to sovereign debt crisis levels. In a war scenario, if your ally attacks your enemy, so if Japan is an enemy of China and the USA attacks Taiwan to take it back, Japan will attack China. That's how it works. Why? Because if you have the intention at some point to attack China, if you're Japan, an attack to prevent an invasion, for example, to weaken the government of China so you don't have to see them 100 years from now, you don't sit on the sidelines and watch. Once the United States declares war, which is why the Japan joined the Quad, which is the new Eastern Asian NATO, right? USA, India, Japan, and Australia now have a defense alliance. So if the USA attacks Taiwan, Japan will also attack Taiwan. I guarantee it. Because they don't want to watch the Chinese and the Americans sue for peace and then to attack some part of China on their own. That makes no sense. If you are going to go to war, you will go to war with your allies. That's why you form alliances, and that's why alliances always precede the war, right? The 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 Germans armed a navy to take on the British Navy in 1914. They were on the path to building a fleet that could defeat the British. At the same time, instead of overarming their navy, the British decided for foreign policy reasons that they would convince the French to be their allies. And the French came around before World War One to realize that their interests better lie allying themselves with Britain than they did with Germany, because they realized if Germany got too strong, now they were in a serious position. This is exactly the same logic that will go on in the Prime Minister's office of Japan as they look at the United States and China fighting. They will become, number one, Japan will become a nuclear power. And number two, if the USA attacks, Japan will be there with them, because they don't want to face China alone if the Americans lose. And any place where the Clausewitzian escalations get out of control, there'll be a flashpoint. And if a flashpoint happens, both sides will launch their pre-planned attacks. Okay, so how do you profit? I'm telling you an earwax full of fancy talk and happy talk. Well, obviously, if you keep your money in the USA, Japan, the UK, Germany, France, India, Pakistan, or China, it will be worthless when war breaks out. Why? Because all those people will print money to win the war. So if you're an investor pre-war, you're basically looking at junk bonds. You are foolishly rewarding the stupidity that's about to happen. You are allowing them. You are an enabler that allows them. And your own economic welfare will not be first on their list, I guarantee you. It's all fire sale potential downside. I wouldn't give the U.S. government a dollar. I've never owned a U.S. government bond. I never will, because I don't believe that the U.S. government spends money wisely. And quite frankly, as Professor Mearsheimer used to say before he passed, and it's a great shame that he isn't here to explain things, U.S. foreign policy is merciless. The U.S. as an empire, I call it the schizophrenic empire after Gwynne Dyer, but the U.S. foreign policy is ruthless. It is merciless. The U.S. government does not act like a nice person. Okay, so if you invest in these countries before war breaks out, your money's basically useless. So I wouldn't recommend that. And if you supply them money during war bonds, you will get a fixed percentage rate, which is a pittance and not worth your time. But if you invest where I'm going, you're going to reap the war equipment frenzy that's going to happen when they all desperately want to buy arms to kill each other. So this company I'm forming called VDI will take advantage of the equipment frenzy, which is what happens in a war. That big impulse of purchasing desperately tries to find every kind of weapon possible to beat the other side down. But what we're going to do is we're going to provide a revolutionary change in how defense contracting, defense procurement works. We are going to change the model so investors are in charge, and governments have no choice but to invest to lease equipment at the investors' whim and not at government purchasing. Governments are stupid about spending money. Trust me, I've spent 30 years in government. 95% of the spending is wasted or overdone or just plain stupid. If you're an investor, you want to have a large market share, a large asset under management value, so that you are offering terms to a government that you can deliver at your guaranteed upside potential profit, not throwing money at a government that's going downhill fast. I know how to do this. I'm a defense scientist. I've been ignored. Many of my projects have been ignored for years, and they're all more effective than stuff that was built. So here's what we're going to do. VDI will lease equipment to nations. We won't sell it. It won't be theirs. It'll be ours. That means we own the IP. They are just an operator. And we're going to negotiate the best terms for us. And the more money we have, the more we can justify our terms. And we are going to create mercenary units in the local country where the conflict is starting, so they don't have to send expensive soldiers from Western nations in order to do it. That alone makes us far more attractive than a contract to Raytheon or General Dynamics or Lockheed Martin or British Aerospace. Sorry, BAE. We're going to do things differently. We're going to do them cheaper and better. So, all right. So this is the reality. And this is another video I did a couple of days ago. Democracies are always the worst prepared for war, always. And I use some numbers, just a quick survey, to show how the United States, the UK, and Germany and Russia contrasted in the run-up to World War I and World War II. So since democracies are the worst prepared, they will be in a panic to rearm, right? They're willing to spend 10 times as much for 1/10 the value because they have no choice. They need to win. Why do they need to win? Because they need to force China, in this case, to pay their debts. And then the nations that outarm and outmaneuver will win. All right? It's going to be a logistical war of attrition at the end of the day. So why not be the one that's loaning the equipment out that that has all the profit potential in it? Why just give money to the U.S. government so they can fritter it away? The winner's debts will get erased, so they're willing to borrow at the worst terms, right? It's like a zero-sum game. If they win, all the money they just spent magically gets paid for by the loser. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to make sure it's profitable for investors, not for governments. And I predict that most of the defense stocks that you see, that the ones that lavish themselves on fat government contracts, they're going to disappear because entities like VDI are going to disruptively destroy their whole business model. We're not going to go through governments. We're going to go to investors, and investors will dictate terms to governments, and governments will have no choice because at the end, we will be the ones with so much money in our system, they will have no choice but to use us to get the equipment as fast as humanly possible into the field so they can win their war. So like I said, I did a video before. If you want to see it, there's the link. The more money we have under management, the faster and better and easier this will be down the road. So that's the trick. This is how, people say, what's the catch? That's a great elevator speech, but what's the real problem? The real problem is you need to have enough money ahead of time. You need to have been prepared ahead of time so that they realize that they have no other way to get what they want, which is rapid military lethality in the field. They have no better option than you. And once we set this up and start doing it, I'm quite sure there will be other SPACs or some other stupid, Silicon Valley egghead or Wall Street loser who will say, hey, we can do the same thing. Well, you can't do the same thing. None of you are defense scientists. You haven't spent your life developing systems for a military. I have. So the benefits of EDI. Veterans will get a 15% discount on their investments. In our business, the business model is a trade secret. It is secret. I will share it with no one. The clientele are trade secrets. I'm not going to say what military is using our systems, and we'll probably use fake brand names for stuff down the road. Our investors are trade secrets. Why? Because I am not going to stop a Russian investor investing for his family's wealth by exposing him as a Russian. I don't care. I don't care where the money comes from. I don't care where the money goes. I will give you a profit with a smile. It's not up to me to decide. And quite frankly, if we were to field equipment with an American force against Russians, for example, then I don't think a Russian would want everyone knowing that he was investing in equipment that was killing his own people. So my contract terms are very stiff on the website, and they're stiff for a reason. You can't sue us, all the rest of that. We are going to invest as much money as we can, as fast as we can. You are allowed to use a nom de guerre, a nom de plume, a call sign, a handle, whatever you wish. It'll all be anonymous. The only thing we'll keep is your account details. But that's because people, investors, should have better rights than governments as debtors. Right. Any evidence you send me to show me that you're a veteran will be destroyed after it's been approved. Like I said, this is the store where you can buy unit coins, as I call them. But I'll be putting more videos up demonstrating, explaining what some of these projects we're putting together are, what their objectives and their time horizons are, and how they will be effective as they go into the field. Thanks very much.